My name is Aloan Hartley. I spent 14 years building a company I believed in, only to be fired without warning by the founder's son, erased like I never mattered. I felt hollow, furious, stripped of everything I thought made me valuable. But somewhere inside that wreckage, I found something stronger, the courage to walk away and rebuild a life on my own terms. Stay with me until the end. I want you to hear the whole story, how I lost almost everything and why I wouldn't trade it back. After you listen, tell me honestly, did I make the right choice? Would you have done the same if it were you? It was a Wednesday. Cloudy, still, like the sky had something it wanted to say but couldn't. I remember the shoes I wore, black leather flats, scuffed at the toe, the wrong choice for a meeting I didn't even know I was walking into. Funny how memory works. It doesn't keep the things you try to hold on to. It saves the moments that blindsided you. That morning started like most others. I left the house with my coffee half finished, keys clenched between my teeth as I locked the front door. The hallway at Kingswell Naturals smelled like citrus cleaner and burnt toast, same as always. I rode the elevator up to the 5th floor with one of the new analysts. He was too nervous to make eye contact and too young to know I'd been there since before the company even started using digital logs. The office itself looked the way money tends to look when it's trying too hard, all glass walls and neutral tones, but it felt hollow, quiet, in a way that made you check if your phone was still on. People moved differently now, more cautious. Conversations turned shorter. Some ended altogether. It had only been 3 months since Walter Kincaid stepped down and handed the reins to his son, Dorian. But you could feel it in the air, the shift, like the building was holding its breath. I used to feel anchored here. 14 years. I'd built teams, systems, a supply chain so efficient it saved Kingswell from collapsing during the 2019 scare. But suddenly, I was watching people whisper instead of wave. My calendar started drying up. My name stopped appearing on joint memos. At first, I told myself it was the nature of change. A new CEO meant adjustments. It didn't mean anything personal. But Dorian made it personal. He was younger than me by a solid decade. Impeccably dressed, polished in that prep school meets tech startup kind of way. He said all the right things, innovation, vision, adaptability, but none of them meant anything. Not really. He had that look in his eyes, like he was always one step ahead of the conversation, always scanning for flaws. And he decided I was one. The first real sign came quietly. One by one, the weekly logistics syncs I'd led for years were canceled or rescheduled indefinitely. I wasn't told who'd take over. Just not me. We crossed paths in the elevator one morning. It was just the two of us. He smiled, too smooth. I think we're overdue for some fresh energy in leadership, he said, adjusting his cufflink. You get that, right? I said nothing. There wasn't a polite way to answer that. Not one that didn't cost me something. Then came the quarterly strategy meeting, the one I'd spent 3 months preparing for. I'd built the entire restructuring proposal, supplier optimization, carbon tracking improvements, a timeline for expanding direct farm partnerships. I knew that system better than anyone. When the slide deck lit up the screen, I felt the blood leave my face. It was mine. My model. My graphs. My projections. Only, my name wasn't anywhere on it. Dorian stood at the front of the room, arm around a young consultant he'd brought in from out west. He called her a rising mind in modern logistics. He said she developed a framework that could revolutionize our vendor cycle. And the room applauded. I didn't. I couldn't. Something cracked inside me, but I stayed seated, fingers clenched beneath the table. I wanted to speak up, wanted to ask if anyone realized what had just happened. But I stayed quiet, because that's what you're taught to do when you're the only one in the room who remembers how things used to work. After that meeting, the walls around me seemed to close in tighter every day. I could feel it, that subtle pull, like I was standing on the wrong side of an invisible line. It wasn't anything loud or obvious. It was quieter than that, meaner. The way conversations would lower when I walked by. The way my name stopped showing up on the leadership agendas, how project updates went out without me even being copied. I told myself it was just transition pains. Companies reshuffle after a new CEO steps in. It wasn't personal. I thought if I kept my head down, if I kept delivering results, someone would notice. Someone would remember. Instead, I started becoming invisible. The office itself didn't change, but the energy did. People used to stop by my desk with questions, ideas, updates. Now they passed by with polite smiles or, more often, with their eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder. Even my email inbox, once relentless, slowed to a trickle. I sat through meetings wondering if anyone even noticed I was there. The calendar invites dried up, and so did my patience, little by little. Still, I tried to stay professional. I smiled when I didn't feel like it. I answered questions no one asked me out loud. I pretended the cold shoulders didn't burn. Because part of me still believed that being steady would matter, that loyalty, somewhere deep down, still counted for something. It was Maureen who saw through it first. I found her in the employee break room one afternoon, filling her thermos with black coffee that looked like it had been sitting on the burner since sunrise. She didn't say much. Maureen never wasted words, but when she caught my eye, she handed me a paper cup of tea. No small talk, no pleasantries. Just tea. I held the cup, feeling the steam sting my fingers. Maureen leaned against the counter, looking out the tiny window like she was thinking about something far away. "You know," she said finally, voice low, "I once thought if I stayed quiet, they'd find a place for me too. Turns out, they just find a way to replace you."
I didn't know what to say to that.
So I just nodded, small, like maybe if I didn't move too much, the sadness sitting between us wouldn't get bigger. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Don't wait until they erase you from the system before you figure out you don't have a home here anymore." She gave me a look, not pitying, not cruel, just real. Then she left, leaving the tea and the warning behind. I stayed in that break room longer than I meant to, staring into the weak amber color of my cup, thinking about how much easier it was to ignore a problem than to admit it was already happening. The real hit came 2 days later. I was helping a new intern set up his dashboard, showing him how to pull supply chain reports. He clicked into the wrong folder, clumsy and new, and an email popped up, not meant for my eyes. It was a thread between Dorian and HR, subject line: Restructuring Phase 1. I didn't mean to read it, not at first, but one sentence caught me like a hook. Recommend eliminating traditional roles that have failed to transition effectively into our lean management model. And below that, a list. A short one. My name was right there, third from the top. I closed the email, so fast, I thought my hand might cramp. I helped the intern finish logging in without letting my voice shake, but inside, something was coming apart at the seams. They weren't just pushing me aside. They were planning to cut me out. Formally. Quietly. By the time I clocked out that evening, my chest felt tight enough to crack a rib. I needed air. I needed space. I ended up at the Cinder Press, the little coffee shop a few blocks from the office, the one with wobbly tables and college kids writing papers. I slid into the back booth and opened my journal, the pages thin and worn from years of use. I didn't even know what I meant to write. I just started. I thought about my father, about the way he used to tell me that dignity wasn't something anyone could hand you, it was something you carried, like your own weather. Some storms you walk into on purpose, he'd said. Some you survive by standing still. I didn't pray to keep my job that night. I didn't ask for mercy or fairness. I just whispered into the coffee-scented air, "Please don't let me lose the part of myself that knows when enough is enough." I closed the journal and stared out the window, watching the college kids laugh and argue and live lives still wide open ahead of them. I thought maybe I could stomach it a little longer. Maybe if I just kept my head down, played the game, I could wait it out. But deep down, I already knew. I was wrong. I couldn't. They called it a performance review. That was the official language on the calendar invite, though it didn't come through until 15 minutes before the meeting. No time to prepare. No agenda attached. Just a cold block of time on my screen, and a line of text that said, "Please attend." I should have known. When I walked into the conference room, there was no one from HR waiting like there should have been. Just Dorian, sitting at the head of the long table with a young man I didn't recognize, maybe legal counsel, maybe just a witness. Neither of them stood when I entered. Dorian simply gestured to the chair across from him. I sat, the vinyl creaking under my weight. The young man pulled out a manila folder, but didn't open it. Dorian started talking right away, voice low and measured, like he was bored with the whole thing already. We've been reviewing team integration and adaptability to the new operational model, he said, not looking directly at me. Unfortunately, your recent contributions don't align with the direction we're taking. Your resistance to strategic adjustments has become a barrier to progress. Resistance. Barrier. I let the words settle, heavy and false. I hadn't resisted anything. I had adapted to more changes at Kingswell than he could probably name. I had built bridges he didn't even know existed. Still, I kept my hands folded calmly on the table. I asked, steady, can you give me a specific example where I've failed to collaborate? Dorian gave a tight, polished smile. It didn't reach his eyes. It's not about isolated incidents, he said. It's about overall energy.
Fit.
We need people who are flexible, responsive to a new pace. You've been more entrenched, flexible, responsive, entrenched. Words that could mean anything. Words you couldn't fight because they slipped through your fingers like smoke. I nodded once, slowly. I heard my own voice cool and even. I expect the company will honor the terms of my contract, including the severance provisions. He gave a small shrug, almost casual. Of course. And just like that, 14 years condensed into a few lines of corporate doublespeak. A lifetime of loyalty filed under non-compliant. I stood. Neither of them did. I picked up my notebook, pointless, empty now, and walked out without looking back. The hallway felt longer than I remembered. Every footstep echoed off the glass and steel, sharp and hollow. I kept my face neutral, my spine straight, all the way to my office. Except it wasn't my office anymore. When I slid my badge over the reader, it buzzed red. Denied. I tried again, slower this time, as if the machine might change its mind if I gave it a second chance. Another sharp buzz. I stood there for a moment, stunned, the badge limp in my hand. Behind me, someone cleared their throat. I turned and saw a young man, early 20s, maybe an intern, looking at me with polite confusion. Are you a vendor? He asked, glancing at my badge like it was a relic. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Vendor. Not even ex-employee. Not even former leadership. Just another outsider trying to get access to a building where I no longer belonged. I shook my head once, curtly, and turned away before he could say anything else. It was a long walk to the parking lot. Longer still to the old Ford sedan I parked at the edge, where the trees started creeping up around the asphalt like they were trying to reclaim it. I climbed into the driver's seat and sat there, keys dangling uselessly from my fingers. I didn't cry. Not yet. Maybe not at all. I just sat there, staring through the windshield at nothing, feeling the slow, heavy settling of something final. No announcement. No farewell. No acknowledgement that I had ever been anything more than a name on a termination list. They hadn't just fired me. They had erased me. I didn't drive straight home after they fired me. I couldn't. I sat in the car until the sun dipped low behind the office buildings, then finally pointed the Ford toward the house like a tired horse finding its way back to the stable. When I stepped through the front door, everything looked the same, the hall light on, the faint smell of laundry detergent hanging in the air, but I felt like an intruder in my own life. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I just set my keys down on the kitchen counter and stood there, staring at the sink. There was a coffee cup sitting in it, still smudged from breakfast. I turned on the tap and started washing it. The water was too hot, but I didn't flinch. I washed the cup once, then again. Then a third time, even though it was clean by the first pass. It wasn't about the cup. It was about trying to scrub away the hollow, sick feeling that I had somehow been peeled out of my own skin, left standing there as a ghost in a place where I used to belong. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe an hour. It wasn't until my phone buzzed in my pocket that I blinked back to the room. It was Maureen. I hesitated before answering. Part of me wanted to stay disconnected, to float in this numbness a little longer. But I pressed the button and lifted the phone to my ear. Hey. I said, my voice rougher than I intended. You busy? She asked. The way she said it, she already knew the answer.
No, I said.
I heard what happened, she said. I figured you might want to know. Maple Hollow's not happy. That caught my attention. Maple Hollow Farms wasn't just any partner. They were the backbone of Kingswell's organic line, built on relationships and handshakes more than contracts. They're nervous about the new direction, Maureen went on. They trust the old system, your system. They're not sure they trust Dorian to honor it. I leaned against the counter, feeling the cool edge dig into my hip. I didn't say anything. If you wanted, she continued, voice careful, you could let them know who really built the foundation they've been standing on all these years.
She left it at that.
No pressure. Just an open door, hanging there between us. I ended the call and stared at the kitchen window, watching the sky darken into a deep, aching blue. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It wasn't even justice, really. It was the truth. I picked up the phone again before I could talk myself out of it and called the contact number I still had for Maple Hollow. Robert answered, the farm's third-generation owner. His voice was cautious at first, but when I explained who I was, I heard the tension ease a little. I'm glad you called, he said. To be honest, we've been concerned. The new leadership's pushing changes that don't sit right with us. Talking about synthetic fertilizers, cutting back on certification processes. It's not what we signed up for. His voice dropped lower. We trusted you, he said simply. Not the name. Not the brand. You. We didn't talk long. It wasn't the kind of conversation that needed a lot of words. By the time I hung up, something had shifted. Over the next 3 days, 2 more suppliers reached out, both longtime partners who had built their reputations on the same principles we used to stand for. They'd heard rumors about Dorian's changes. They weren't sure they could keep doing business with a company that seemed more interested in cutting corners than keeping promises. I knew then that it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about something bigger, something worth fighting for. I opened my laptop that night, fingers hovering over the keyboard for a long moment before I started typing. It wasn't the manifesto. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was just a simple, clear document. The original standards manual I had written years ago, the one that had helped Kingswell grow from a startup to a trusted name. I attached it to an email addressed to the 3 farms. At the bottom, I wrote one sentence. If you want to preserve the integrity we built together, know that I will not stand by silently. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. It was Robert from Maple Hollow. The message was short but heavy. We are suspending our contract with Kingswell effective immediately, pending a full review of compliance standards. I stared at the screen for a long time, heart pounding against my ribs. It wasn't revenge. It was redemption. And it was only the beginning. It didn't take long for the cracks to start showing. Less than 2 weeks after I sent out that email, word started leaking from inside Kingswell. Little ripples that turned into something bigger. First, it was the missed shipments. Orders that should have gone out on Monday sat on loading docks until Thursday, still missing key certification papers. Then came the quality control issues, products getting flagged for not meeting the organic standards we had fought to maintain for years. Distributors started calling, asking questions that no one at Kingswell seemed prepared to answer. By the end of the 3rd week, customers were starting to complain. Shipments were late. Paperwork was messy. The once pristine image of Kingswell Naturals was starting to blur around the edges. I heard about it the way you hear about bad weather moving in. Whispers through old contacts, concerned texts from friends still trying to hang on inside. The official line from Dorian was predictable. A mass email went out to clients and vendors, blaming temporary challenges associated with leadership transition and promising that new efficiencies would soon resolve the delays. It wasn't just spin. It was cowardice. Late one night, I was folding laundry in the dim light of the den when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Maureen. No greeting, no small talk, just one line. Everything's falling apart, and they know who really kept it together. I sat down on the edge of the couch, reading the words over and over. Maureen added another note a few minutes later, more careful this time. I refused to sign off on a batch last week. Full of shortcuts. They called me in for a realignment meeting. Guess who chaired it? I didn't have to guess. In my chest, I felt a tight, slow burn, not anger, exactly, but something heavier.
Sadder.
It wasn't just that Dorian was running the place into the ground. It was that nobody seemed willing to say out loud what we all knew. He was never qualified to run it in the first place. The breaking point came quietly, but decisively. One afternoon, as I sat at my kitchen table reviewing some freelance consulting work, 3 separate emails dropped into my inbox within minutes of each other. Different senders. Different farm partners. Each message carried the same news. They were terminating their supply contracts with Kingswell Naturals. Robert from Maple Hollow wrote it plain and simple. We no longer feel the company reflects the standards that originally built our trust. Without Aloan Hartley's leadership on supply integrity, we cannot continue. I stared at the screen, barely breathing. 14 years of building trust, ripped apart in just a few months. And yet, reading their words, I didn't feel anger. I felt something cleaner. Something harder. Vindication. It wasn't about getting even. It wasn't even about getting noticed. It was about the simple, irreversible fact that the truth, the real truth, always finds a way through eventually. That night, as I packed away the last of the consulting papers, my phone rang again. It wasn't Maureen this time. It was a number I hadn't seen in years. I answered, cautious. It was a reporter from the Asheville Ledger, the regional business paper. She got straight to the point. We're hearing some disturbing reports about product quality issues at Kingswell, she said. Former partners are pulling out. Would you be willing to comment? I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, forcing my voice steady. I'm sorry, I said. I no longer work there. I can't speak to their current operations. She paused, sensing there was more. But I didn't offer anything else. After a moment, she thanked me and hung up. I set the phone down and stared out the window. Somewhere out there, the house lights were blinking on across the neighborhood, one by one. Families sitting down to dinner. Kids doing homework at kitchen tables. Life going on steady and stubborn, the way it always did. And then, as if the night hadn't thrown enough at me, another email came in. This one wasn't from a farm or a journalist. It was from Walter Kincaid himself. Short and formal. Aloan, I would appreciate the chance to meet with you privately regarding recent developments at Kingswell. Please let me know if you are willing. I leaned back in my chair, heart thudding in my chest. Walter had built Kingswell from scratch. He wasn't the type to send out requests lightly. Whatever this meeting was about, it wasn't just about saving face. It was about salvaging whatever was left of a name we had both once believed in. I met Walter at a place called Haven's Corner, a little coffee shop tucked between a used bookstore and a pharmacy. It hadn't changed in years. Same cracked leather booths, same smell of burnt espresso and cinnamon muffins. I almost smiled when I stepped inside. It felt like a slice of the world I used to know, back when the air around Kingswell still held hope. Walter was already seated, his hands wrapped around a plain white mug like it was the only thing keeping him steady. He looked older than I remembered, not just the gray hair, but the way he sat, shoulders stooped like he was carrying a weight he couldn't set down. He looked up when I slid into the booth across from him. His face softened, and for a moment, there was nothing between us but years of shared history. I made a mistake, he said, without preamble. His voice was raspy but clear. I thought giving him the title would give him the backbone too. I didn't realize how fast he'd tear apart everything we built. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let him sit with it the way he needed to. I didn't know they pushed you out, Walter said, his hands tightening around the mug. Not until it was too late. I nodded once, slow and deliberate. He leaned forward slightly. I'm asking if you'd consider coming back. Not forever. Just long enough to steady the ship. Long enough to remind people who we were supposed to be. It wasn't anger that rose in me. It was something quieter, sadness maybe, or the clean edge of understanding that some things, once broken, don't get put back the same way. I folded my hands on the table, meeting his eyes. I can't, I said. I can't go back to a place that treated me like a liability the minute it was convenient. Even if it's different now, even if you mean well, it wouldn't be the same. Walter closed his eyes for a moment, a slow exhale sinking from his chest. I understand, he said finally, voice thick. I don't blame you. He tapped his fingers against the mug, once, twice, like he was thinking how to say the next part. If you're willing, he said, do something better. Take what we tried to build, and make something worth believing in again. Doesn't have to carry the Kingswell name, just the spirit. I didn't answer right away. But in my gut, I already knew the answer. We talked a little more, nothing heavy, and then I left Haven's Corner and walked out into the sharp chill of a March morning, the kind that wakes you all the way up. That night, I pulled out a legal pad and started sketching ideas. Nothing fancy. No investors, no big promises. Just the bones of something real. By the end of the week, I sat across a dusty farm table with Robert from Maple Hollow and 2 other suppliers who had walked away from Kingswell. We talked for hours, hashing out what we wanted, what we didn't, what we refused to compromise on. We decided on a name, Riverroot Foods. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't trying to be. It was about going back to the source, letting things grow right, not fast. We agreed to set up a temporary headquarters inside an abandoned greenhouse outside Asheville. It wasn't much. Broken windows, rusted vents, a dirt floor that needed tending. But it was ours. Later that night, I called Maureen. If you want to, I said, we're starting over. Not a copy of Kingswell. Something better. There was a pause on the line, and then she laughed. A dry, warm sound I hadn't heard in a long time. You know where to find me, she said. I hung up feeling lighter than I had in months. But good news has a way of stirring up the dirt. The next morning, I woke to a half-dozen texts buzzing my phone off the nightstand. One of them was a link to an article from the Asheville Ledger. In bold, black letters. Kingswell Naturals, from organic pioneer to ethics scandal? The article detailed a leaked internal memo, one where Dorian had allegedly ordered quality assurance standards to be loosened, cutting corners to meet shipping deadlines. The fallout was immediate. Customers pulling out. Vendors panicking. Staff questioning leadership. A quiet empire, starting to crumble. I set the phone down on the counter, hands steady, heart even steadier. This wasn't my fight anymore. But it was the proof that walking away had never been the mistake. Staying would have been. Dorian tried to spin it, of course. When the news broke wide enough that even the evening broadcasts picked it up, he called for a press conference like it was business as usual. He stood behind a podium dressed in a tailored navy suit, the Kingswell Naturals logo projected behind him in cheerful green and gold. I watched it from my laptop, sipping coffee gone cold between my hands. He started with the usual boilerplate about growing pains and market realities, but it was the soundbite that stuck, the one that played over and over on local radio for the rest of the week. We are simply adjusting to market demands, he said, smiling like the house wasn't on fire behind him. No company can cling to outdated models forever. Adjusting to market demands. Outdated models. I closed the laptop gently, like shutting a door between myself and something rotten. Some things don't deserve your outrage. They deserve your silence. But not everyone stayed silent. That same afternoon, the Kingswell board called an emergency meeting. No press. No statements. Just a cold, closed-door session behind the same glass walls where I used to sit, back when meetings still felt like they mattered. Walter showed up in person, walking slowly but steadily, carrying a thick folder tucked under his arm. I heard about it later from someone who still had a badge. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw accusations. He just laid out the quarterly losses, contract terminations, product recalls, vendor complaints, line by painful line. When he finished, he stood there for a moment, his hands flat on the table. And then he said, clear enough that no one could mistake him, I am recommending the immediate suspension of Dorian Kincaid as Chief Executive Officer. Effective today. For a few long seconds, the room was dead silent. Then one by one heads nodded. No argument. No desperate pleas. Just a quiet kind of ending. The kind that doesn't need shouting to leave a mark. I didn't get a call from Walter afterward. I didn't expect one. He knew, maybe better than anyone, that some bridges, once burned, aren't meant to be rebuilt. Later that evening, as I was closing out emails at Riveret's makeshift office, a converted greenhouse still smelling faintly of earth and rain, my phone buzzed. It was Maureen. No words this time. Just a picture. A plain office door, the brushed metal plate ripped off, leaving behind faint scratches where the adhesive had pulled away. Underneath the image, she typed, "Not justice, but a good start." I sat there a long moment, staring at that photo, feeling something settle inside me. It wasn't joy exactly. It wasn't triumph. It was relief, a slow, solid exhale from somewhere deep in my chest. I set the phone down and turned back to my laptop. River Foods' homepage flickered to life on the screen. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished yet. But it was real. A single banner stretched across the top. From the ground up, real food, real integrity. I leaned back in the old wooden chair, letting the ache of the day pass through me without fighting it. I remembered the first time I walked through Kingswell's doors, clutching a resume printed at the local library, hoping to build something that mattered. I had built it, and when it was no longer a place that honored what we stood for, I had let it go. Not because it didn't matter anymore, but because I did. I didn't fight to get my job back. I didn't fight to get revenge. I fought to get myself back. And somehow, sitting there under the faint hum of grow lights and new beginnings, I knew I had won. The morning came in slow and golden, the way it does when you've finally stopped running. I woke up early in the little house on the hill just outside Maple Hollow. It wasn't much, a narrow porch, creaky floorboards, a stubborn front door that stuck when it rained. But it was mine, and it was enough. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, the old wood cold against my skin. The coffee pot sputtered and hissed like an old friend waking up beside me. Outside the window, the grass shimmered with dew, and somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird stitched a song into the quiet. No alarms. No meetings. No fake smiles over lukewarm coffee in glass-walled rooms. Just a day waiting to be lived, real and unpolished. I leaned against the counter, watching the first light pool across the fields, thinking about how different the air felt now. Not cleaner exactly, but honest. No buzz of fluorescent lights, no hum of anxious energy thick in my throat. Just the ordinary miracle of a life not built around proving my worth to someone else. I thought about Dorian once or twice, the way his face looked the day Walter cut him loose. Not angry. Not broken. Empty. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger when I thought about him. I didn't feel triumph either. I just felt sorry. Not because of what he did to me, but because of what he lost in himself somewhere along the way. Because he believed that stripping things down and cutting corners could make a legacy faster than patience and roots ever could. I pulled out my journal from the kitchen drawer, the same one I'd been writing in since everything started to fall apart. I flipped past pages heavy with grief and confusion and found a fresh one. Then I wrote, "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's refusing to let someone else name you again." I set the pen down and let the words hang there. Later that morning, I met with the new team for River Foods. Just 6 of us, crammed around a scratched-up table under a leaking greenhouse roof. Maureen brought coffee in a battered thermos. Robert from Maple Hollow laid out some early shipping plans. A young woman named Ellie, barely out of college, nervously shared a marketing sketch she had drawn up by hand. She reminded me of myself, once, hungry to build something real. No titles. No politics. Just a small group of people trying to do right by the land, by the work, by each other. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't big. But it was honest. We made plans that day, messy, hopeful plans scrawled on butcher paper with colored markers. Plans that didn't need to be perfect. Only good. Only true. Before the day ended, I drove out to Gracewood Chapel. It was a squat little building on the edge of town, wood peeling on the shutters, bell rope frayed and patched. I used to sit in the back pew there during the worst days at Kingswell, asking for courage, for patience, for something to hold on to. Today, I didn't ask for anything. I slipped into the quiet sanctuary, slid into my old spot near the window, and just sat. I bowed my head, not heavy with grief or guilt this time, and whispered, "I didn't save the title. I didn't save the company, but I saved my soul. Somewhere behind me, the old pastor shuffled down the aisle, paused just long enough to give me a slow, knowing nod before he disappeared into the side hall. No sermon. No words needed. On the way home, I stopped the truck at the edge of a field where the clover grew wild and thick. I swung the door open, stepped out barefoot into the wet grass, and just breathed. The air smelled like earth and rain and something bigger than mistakes, something that knew how to keep growing, even after fire. I carried a small wooden basket with me, swinging it against my hip as I wandered. The sun was starting to tilt low, slanting gold through the mist, turning every blade of grass into something bright and clean. I smiled without meaning to, not because I had won in some grand, public way, but because I hadn't lost myself. At the very end of that day's journal, under the pages filled with plans and promises, I wrote one last line before closing it. I used to think surviving meant staying silent. Now I know dignity isn't something you bargain for. It's something you never put on sale. And as the field opened wide before me, and the sky bent low to kiss the land, I understood, deep in my bones. This was what winning really looked like. Maybe you've been there too, standing in the middle of something you gave your heart to, realizing it no longer sees you the way it once did. Maybe you've had to make that impossible choice between staying quiet to survive or speaking up to live. I'm not here to tell you what's right or wrong. I just know this. Sometimes the bravest thing we do is walk away, not out of anger, but out of respect for the person we're still becoming. If my story stirred something in you, I hope you'll stay with me. There are so many more roads to walk together. And if you feel like sharing, have you ever had to choose yourself, even when it broke your heart? I'd love to hear your story too.